I'm 92 years old, and 5 years ago I discovered the secret that changed my life. The coffee was still too hot to drink, so I just held the cup with both hands and let it warm my fingers, the way I do most mornings now. It was a Tuesday. I remember it was a Tuesday because Catherine always calls on Tuesdays, and the phone was already lighting up on the counter before I'd even taken my first sip. I let it ring, not because I didn't want to hear my daughter's voice, because I knew, before I picked it up, exactly what she was going to say, and I wanted 30 more seconds of my own morning before the day became about whether or not I was managing. That's the word she uses, managing, as if my life is a small business that's quietly going under. I want to tell you something, and I need you to hear it from someone who has no reason left to lie. I'm 92 years old. I live alone in the same house I've lived in for 44 years, longer than most of you have been alive. And 5 years ago, when I thought the best of me was already behind me and buried, I found out something that nobody had ever told me. Nobody. Not my mother, not my husband, not the priest, not a single one of the books I read pretending I was fine. My name is Evelyn Grace, and I'm here because I spent 90 years waiting for permission that was never going to come, and I don't want you to do the same. Let me guess who you are. You might be younger than me, watching this with a parent or a grandparent in mind, wondering how to help someone who keeps insisting they don't need help. Or you might be closer to my age, sitting somewhere quiet, the house too still around you, wondering if this is just how it is now, wondering if the rest of it is only smaller rooms and more careful steps, and people speaking to you a little slower than they used to. If that's you, I want you to stay. I'm not going to tell you everything is wonderful. I'm too old to insult you like that. But I'm going to tell you the truth, and the truth turned out to be better than the lie I'd been telling myself for years. So let me start where it actually started, not with the good part. With the morning I couldn't get out of bed. I was 87. Harold had been gone 6 years by then. We were married 52 years, and people will tell you that after 50 years you learn to be your own person inside a marriage, and maybe some people do. I didn't. I don't say that with shame anymore, though it took me a long time to say it without shame. Harold was an engineer, a quiet man, dry as a stick of chalk, the kind of humor you only caught if you were paying close attention. He drank his coffee black and read the newspaper front to back every single morning, folding it into these neat quarters, and he'd read me one thing he found ridiculous, just one, and then go quiet again. For 52 years, I knew exactly who I was the moment I woke up, because I woke up next to him, and then I didn't. The first years after he died, I was busy. Grief keeps you busy, which is a cruel kind of mercy. There are papers and people and casseroles and a funeral, and then 100 small funerals after the big one, every time you find his reading glasses in a drawer, every time you reach for 2 cups instead of 1. I had things to do. The children were watching me closely, and so I performed. I want to be honest about that word. I performed being fine. I made the coffee. I answered the phone. I told Diana when she called crying that I was holding up, and then I held her up, because that's what I've always done. But grief doesn't end when the casseroles stop. It just goes quiet and moves in, and the years passed, and the busyness ran out, and the phone calls spaced out, which is natural, which is right. People have their own lives. And one morning, 6 years into being a widow, the house was so quiet I could hear the clock in the hallway, and I lay there in the bed on my side, the side I'd slept on for over 50 years, even though there's a whole empty half now, and I could not think of a single reason to put my feet on the floor. I'm going to say that again because I want you to really hear it. There was nothing especially wrong with my body that morning. My legs worked. My heart was beating. I just could not find the reason. And I lay there long enough that the coffee I didn't make went unmade, and the day I didn't start went unstarted. And somewhere around noon, I cried. Not the loud kind, the kind that just leaks out of you sideways, and I thought, this is it now. This is what's left. I'm a guest in my own life, waiting politely for it to be over. That was the bottom. I'm telling you about the bottom because the secret didn't come to me on a mountaintop. It came to me down there, in the dark, in the unmade bed, at 87 years old. Now, here's where my children come in, and I want to be fair to them because I love them and they love me, and almost everything that went wrong between us went wrong out of love. That's the part nobody warns you about. It isn't the people who don't care who'll smother you. It's the ones who care too much. Catherine is my oldest. She's 68 now, and she's protective. And I mean that the way you'd mean it about a dog that won't let the mailman near the porch. She loves me ferociously, and she is terrified all the time that something is going to happen to me. And her way of handling that terror is to manage. As I got into my late 80s, she started coming by more, and she'd walk through the house with her eyes doing this thing, this scan, looking at the stairs, looking at the rug by the door, looking at the bottle of pills on the counter, mentally cataloging all the ways her mother might die. She brought me a pamphlet once, a glossy one, with a photograph of smiling, silver-haired people playing cards at a place with a name like a golf course. She set it on the table and didn't say anything, and I didn't say anything, and the pamphlet sat there between us like a small dead bird. I knew what it meant. She wanted me somewhere safe, somewhere with railings and a nurse down the hall and no stairs and no memories. She wanted me to be safe so badly that she was willing to take away the only thing I had left, which was my own four walls and the dent in the carpet where Harold's chair used to sit. Robert is my middle child, my son, 65, and Robert lives far away and loves me in the way of a man who solves problems. When Catherine told him she was worried, Robert called me with solutions, a medical alert button I could wear around my neck, the kind where you press it and it tells someone you've fallen, a cleaning service, a grocery delivery, a man to come do the gutters. Every one of these was kind. Every one of these was sensible. And every single one of them was an answer to a question I wasn't asking. Robert thought the problem was that I might fall down. The problem was that I didn't want to get up. You cannot buy a button for that. There's no service that delivers a reason to be alive. And Diana, my youngest, 61, my Diana. She's the closest to me. She always has been. She's the one who calls just to talk, the one who feels everything at full volume. But Diana's love comes with a weather system. She'd call me, and within 5 minutes, she'd be crying about how she couldn't bear the thought of losing me, how she didn't know what she'd do, how she lay awake worrying, and I would spend the whole call comforting my own daughter about my own death. I'd hang up exhausted, having been cared for in a way that required me to do all the caring. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to make them sound like villains, and they're not. Catherine's fear is love. Robert's solutions are love. Diana's tears are love. But all three of them, in their different ways, were looking at me and seeing something fragile, something already half gone, something to be protected and managed and worried over. And here is the thing I have to confess to you, the thing I'm not proud of. I started to see myself that way too. That's the danger nobody tells you about. When enough people who love you treat you like you're disappearing, you start to disappear, just to make it easier for them. You start sitting down more carefully so no one worries. You stop mentioning the things you'd like to do because you can already hear the answer, the gentle, worried no. You make yourself smaller and smaller, and you tell yourself it's kindness, letting them not worry, when really it's a slow surrender. And I had surrendered so much of myself that the morning I couldn't get out of bed, There was almost nothing of me left to argue for getting up. I'm going to tell you what turned it, and I'm warning you ahead of time that it's going to sound too small. The biggest things always do. It started with Harold's mug. After I finally pulled myself out of that bed in the late afternoon, dragging the day behind me like a wet coat, I went to the kitchen and I opened the cabinet, and there was his mug, the black coffee mug he'd used every morning for 30 years, chipped on the handle that I had never been able to give away. And I stood there holding it, and I thought about him reading me one ridiculous thing from the paper and going quiet, and I realized something that knocked the wind out of me. Harold would have been furious with me. That dry, patient man who fixed everything that could be fixed and accepted everything that couldn't would have looked at me lying in that bed all day, waiting to die in the most polite and tidy way possible, and he would have said, in his flat voice, that I was using him as an excuse, and he would have been right. I had decided that my life ended when his did. I had been treating the years since as a waiting room, and nobody had asked me to do that. Not him, not the children. I had signed that agreement all by myself in the dark and then blamed it on grief and on age and on everyone's worry. That's the secret. I told you it would sound too small. The secret is that nobody is coming to give you permission. Not your children, not your doctor, not your grief, not your dead husband. There is no moment where someone official looks at you and says, "All right, you've suffered enough. You've waited long enough. You're allowed to want your life back now." That moment never comes. You will wait for it until you die, the way I almost did. The permission has to come from you, and you can give it to yourself at any age, even at 87, even in an unmade bed, even with a glossy pamphlet sitting on the table telling you where they'd like to put you. I had spent my whole life waiting to be needed, because being needed was the only way I knew to deserve my place in a room. I was needed as a wife. I was needed as a mother. And when Harold died and the children built their own lives, I wasn't needed anymore, and I mistook that for not being allowed to exist. But those aren't the same thing. They are not the same thing at all, and figuring out the difference between them is the whole last chapter of a life. I wasn't dying of loneliness. I was dying of having abandoned myself. So the next morning, I got up, and I did the smallest possible thing, because the small things are the only honest place to start. I made my coffee in my own cup, not his, and instead of drinking it standing up at the counter like a person just passing through her own kitchen, I sat down at the table, in the good chair by the window, and I drank it slowly, and I looked out at the garden. That's all. I gave myself one cup of coffee that belonged entirely to me, not to anyone's worry, not to anyone's schedule, just mine. It sounds like nothing, but I had not done one single thing purely for myself in so long that I'd forgotten I was allowed to. And the next day I did it again. And then I added a thing. I had always wanted to learn to draw, my whole life, and I'd never had time, the way mothers never have time, and then the way widows are told they're too old. I bought a cheap pad of paper and some pencils, and I drew that chipped coffee mug badly, and it was the worst drawing you have ever seen, and I laughed out loud alone in my kitchen for the first time in years. I want to stop here and be honest with you, because I don't want to make this sound like a tidy recovery. It wasn't tidy. There were mornings I slid right back into the bed and the dark. There still are sometimes, even now. Grief doesn't leave, it just changes shape, and some days it gets heavy again and sits on my chest. I'm not going to lie to you and say I found a switch and flipped it. What I found was a door, and a door you have to keep choosing to walk through every single morning, sometimes several times in one morning. And the hardest part, the part I didn't expect, was that wanting my life back at 87 felt like a betrayal of Harold. This is the most private thing I'll tell you, so I'll only say it once. When I started to feel alive again, when I caught myself genuinely enjoying a morning, I felt guilty, as if joy were a thing that belonged to the two of us together, and I had no right to it alone. I'd be sketching at the table and I'd feel his absence so sharply that I'd say something to him out loud in the empty kitchen. I still do that. I talk to him. And for a while, I was afraid that building a life he wasn't in meant leaving him behind, meant the marriage was finally, truly over. It took me a long time to understand that loving someone who's gone does not require you to die alongside them by inches. The most loyal thing I could do for the 52 years we had was to actually live the years I have left. He'd read me one ridiculous thing from the paper and go quiet, and I finally understood what the quiet had always meant. It was never abandonment. It was faith. It was him trusting me to carry on. I'd forgotten that, and once I remembered it, the guilt loosened its grip, not all the way, but enough. So I kept walking through the door. And here's what surprised me most. As I came back to life, the people around me had to learn how to deal with a mother who had decided to be a person again, and that was not always a smooth thing. The conversation with Catherine was the hardest. The pamphlet conversation. She came over one Sunday clearly having rehearsed, with that careful voice people use when they've decided something for your own good, and she laid out her case for why it was time to think about a safer place. And the old me, the disappearing me, would have nodded and gone quiet and let the dead bird sit on the table. But I had been giving myself permission for a few months by then, and permission is a muscle, it gets stronger with use. So I told her no, not cruelly. I took her hand, and I told her that I understood she was afraid, and that her fear was love, and that I was grateful for it. And then I told her that I was not going to spend whatever time I have left being kept safe instead of being kept alive. That if I fall on these stairs someday, and that's the end of it, it will have happened in my own house, in the middle of my own life, and that is a better ending than fading away somewhere safe and beige, playing cards with strangers, waiting. She cried. I held her, but I didn't take it back, and that was the difference. The old me would have soothed her by surrendering. The new me let her be upset and stayed standing anyway. Loving someone doesn't mean handing them control of your life so they can feel less afraid. That's one of the things I learned the hard way, and I learned it at 87. With Robert, it was simpler, almost funny. He kept sending solutions, and one day I told him that I'd take the grocery delivery, gladly because it freed up my afternoon, but that I didn't want the medical alert button, and when he started to argue, I told him the truth, which is that I'd rather risk a bad fall than wear a constant reminder around my neck that everyone is just waiting for me to break. He went quiet, my practical son, and then he said something I'll keep. He said he hadn't realized that all his solutions added up to a single message, and the message was that he expected me to fail. He's a good man. He just thought the problem was the gutters. The problem is never the gutters. Diana was the one I had to be most gentle with and most firm. I had to stop letting her use me as the place she set down her fear of losing me. The next time she called crying about my death, I let her cry, and then I told her, kindly, that I was still here, alive, on the phone, right now, and that I would rather we spend the time I have talking about something other than the day I won't be here for. I told her I needed her to let me be alive while I'm alive. She got quiet, too. They all got quiet eventually, the way you do when someone tells you a true thing you didn't want to hear. And slowly, the relationship changed. Diana started telling me about her own life again, the messy, ordinary parts, instead of just weeping about mine. We became two women talking, instead of a frightened daughter and a mother she'd already half buried. And then there are the ones who never needed me to change because they already saw me, my grandchildren, There are 7 of them, and the older ones especially kept me honest. Sophie is 25 now, and she started coming by on her own without being sent, and she asks me real questions. Not how are you managing, real ones. She asked me once what I was like at her age, and she actually waited for the answer, and I told her things I'd never told anyone, and she treated me like a woman with a whole life behind her instead of a fragile thing to be checked on. And James, 23, my quiet one, the one most like his grandfather, he just comes and sits. Sometimes we barely talk. He'll be on his phone and I'll be drawing, and an hour will pass, and it's the most comfortable hour of my week, because he isn't watching me for signs of decline. He's just keeping me company, like an equal, like a person likes to be kept company. They didn't have to learn to see me. They never stopped. And then there's Rose, my youngest, who is 8. Just last year, she was sitting at my kitchen table eating crackers and swinging her legs because they still don't reach the floor, and she looked up at me, completely casual, crumbs everywhere, and she asked me what I do all day when nobody's there. Now everyone asks me that. Catherine asks it as a test. Robert asks it because he wants to fill the answer with services. Diana asks it and starts crying before I can reply. They all ask it the same way, with this soft, worried face, like they're asking how bad it is, like the honest answer would break their hearts. But Rose didn't ask it like that. Rose asked it the way she'd ask what's at the bottom of the ocean. Pure curiosity, no pity in it at all. She actually wanted to know. She thought there might be something interesting down there. And here's the thing. 5 years earlier, I wouldn't have had an answer. 5 years earlier, the honest answer would have been nothing. I wait. I keep the house tidy for visitors who come less and less. But sitting there with Rose, I realized I had a real answer, a long one, a true one. I told her I draw. I told her about my friends and our terrible jokes. I told her about the garden and the newspaper and the walks. And her face lit up. Because to an 8-year-old, of course, an old woman's days are full of things. Why wouldn't they be? And I thought, there it is. That's the proof. The little girl who expected my life to be interesting was right, and it took me until 87 to agree with her. That's why I keep her close in my mind. Children haven't yet learned that they're supposed to feel sorry for us. They just assume we're still people. They're right. 5 years later, here is what my days actually look like at 92, in case there's a Rose out there who genuinely wants to know. I draw every morning, and I'm still not very good, but I'm better. And good was never the point. I have a few friends, real ones, women near my age and a couple younger, and we are honest with each other in a way you can only be honest when you've stopped pretending you have forever. I take a short walk when my hip allows it, and I sit on the bench when it doesn't, and I've decided that sitting on the bench is also a perfectly good way to spend 20 minutes of a life. I read the newspaper, front to back, the way Harold did, and I fold it into quarters even though there's no one to read the ridiculous part to, and some days I read it out loud to him anyway, and I've stopped being embarrassed about that. I am not less old than I was 5 years ago. My body has continued doing what bodies do, and it has done quite a lot of it, because 92 is 92. The stairs are harder, the mornings are stiffer. I'm not going to stand here and pretend that the secret made me young, because that would be exactly the kind of lie I promised you I wouldn't tell. I am 92, and I am much closer to the end than the beginning, and I know it. And I think about it, and I'm not afraid of it the way I used to be. Because here is the thing the secret really gave me, underneath all of it. I'm not waiting anymore. That's all. That's the whole gift. For years I was sitting in a waiting room called the rest of my life, and the only thing on the schedule was the end. And now I'm not in the waiting room. I'm in the rooms I actually live in, doing the small, ordinary things that turned out to be the entire point. The secret was never how to live longer. I have no control over that, and neither do you. The secret was how to stop waiting to die and start being alive in whatever time there is, which turned out to be a decision made privately that nobody hands you and nobody can take away. So if you're younger and you've got a mother or a father or a grandparent who keeps insisting they're fine, who keeps refusing your help, who won't wear the button or move to the safe place, I want you to consider that they might not be confused. They might be doing exactly what I did. They might be fighting to stay a person instead of a problem to be solved. Love them by seeing them, not just by protecting them. Ask them a real question and then actually wait for the answer, the way Rose does. Be the grandchild, not the worried face. It's the kindest thing you can do, and almost nobody does it. And there's a hard thing in this for you too, and I'll say it plainly. Your fear of losing them can become the very thing that takes them from you while they're still right here in the room. You can grieve a person so much in advance that you forget to enjoy them. I've been on the receiving end of that, loved by people so afraid of my death that they couldn't be present for my life, and I'm telling you, it is a lonely place to be loved from. Don't do that to someone while you still have them. And if you're closer to my age, sitting in a quiet house with the clock too loud, I'm going to say to you the thing nobody said to me, so that you don't have to find it at the bottom of an unmade bed the way I did. You don't need anyone's permission. Not your children's, not your body's, not even your grief's. You are allowed to want your life right up until the last minute of it. You are allowed to start something new at 87, at 92, at whatever number you've decided is too late. The fact that there's less of it left is exactly why it matters more, not less. I still set out 1 cup most mornings, my cup, and most mornings I sit in the good chair by the window and drink it slowly, and it belongs entirely to me. Outside, the garden does what it does without asking anyone's permission, and I've come to think that's the wisest thing I look at all day. Harold's chair is gone now. I finally gave it away, and where it sat there's a little table where I keep my pencils. I think he'd like that. I think the quiet man would have folded his paper into quarters and said nothing, and the nothing would have meant he was proud. My name is Evelyn Grace. I'm 92 years old. I spent 90 of those years waiting for someone to tell me I was allowed. And 5 years ago, I finally stopped waiting and told myself, don't wait as long as I did.